Yeah, for sure. We're live. Okay, so I guess the LinkedIn problem is solved. Okay, thank God. Oh my
Nice.
God. Yeah, I mean, I
How did
did
you
like,
even know that the LinkedIn problem was solved? It just tells you.
I think I just saw like, I mean, it didn't really show as like
Yeah.
a giant explanation mark or something on my end, so I think it's fine. I mean, maybe I will just open my LinkedIn just to like double check because I was having a heart attack this morning as like we already spent like literally 10 minutes on like onboarding the person on like our onboarding our guest on our show. And then it was not working on LinkedIn. So I'm like, okay, maybe this is how I die today. But anyway, so
You're
it was
alive.
a dramatic
It's
moment.
all
Yeah, I'm
good. We're
live.
hanging out. It's Thursday. It's almost Friday.
It's
It's
live. Oh, we're live. Okay, so sorry. I'm like just so excited because I saw myself live. Okay. That's just like
haven't we been live for like a minute? I thought we'd been
yeah,
live
I
for a
know,
minute.
I know, I know. I just really
We're just
wanted
hanging
to
out. We're just
travel
chatting.
to
By the
the
way, why did you pick those two books in the background? Do you cycle through them? Is there a reason why
no,
you
it's
chose them?
my book, so I wrote them. So, like,
Ah,
I, like, put them in the background as, like, basically the CMO of myself. Uh, oh my
there
god.
you go.
Hi, Anna. Great seeing you. I mean, I just wanted to say hi to the audience. Oh my god. Anyway, yeah. So, this is, like, my narcissism moment of, like, promoting myself in the background, but anyway,
Hey, you
how
got
about you?
what's that?
Yeah. How about you? Like, I like your background of, like, one of the meeting room at Adobe, assuming.
Yeah, every room's got a different theme. So I'm actually in San Jose today. I'm normally based in the San Francisco office, but we go back and forth. It's sort of like I can drive with my eyes closed now between SF and San Jose. You know,
Oh my god. I mean, I would not
don't
want to
drive
be in
with
that
your eyes
car though.
closed.
Yeah, don't do that. Let's just not die today. Okay, so I wanna give the audience a little bit of your, background. So you were a founder before you joined the big tech, era. So, like, why don't we talk about, like, what are some, like, journeys that you've learned early on in your career that kind of you took into your big tech career?
Journeys, yeah. I mean, there's a lot. So I guess let me talk a little bit about my journey real quick, and then I think you wanted to know about some learnings, right? So
Mhm,
I'd say my journey's been a combination of three things: the arts, tech, and business. On the arts side, my dad's an artist. My
mhm,
mum was a composer. So they're definitely not ones to teach me math and help me with math homework for sure when I was in high school. But always passionate about the arts. So actually in college I went to art school,
mhm,
and I also studied computer science. So that was an interesting experience. And so actually my first business, you talked about founder, my first business was actually an agency
mhm,
uh, very early on. And through that process, eventually I got a real job. I worked in tech. First job was with Microsoft in Seattle, and that was a really good
mhm,
experience. And on the business side, actually, I spent a lot of my 20s as a management consultant. So completely different, to the arts world or the tech world. Big part of being great in consulting is the travel, as you probably know.
mhm.
So I spent a lot of that time living overseas, and I lived in Dubai for 6 months. I worked in property development there. I did a lot of banking and financial services in Asia, and worked in agriculture in New Zealand. That was quite an interesting opportunity. So it's really a combination of those three things: arts, technology, and business. And I think the intersection is what I'm most passionate about, over my career. And so done a lot of like specific things, but then, certainly my role now, I combine the three together. Learnings, I mean, where can we go? I mean, I could start with one. Ego is terrible. I think ego is something that really helps you make mistakes and helps you fail. And I think early on, the younger you are, or at least for me, the more you think you know everything. And now I feel like I know nothing, and you hear this from people a lot, right? But it's so true. Like, I think early on, particularly when you get sort of some early so-called quote unquote successes, right? When you're young, you think you can, conquer the world, and you have a lot of, you can get cocky. And I think whenever that happens, well, whenever it happens to me, I fail. I do something really bad. I stop learning, and I stumble. So I think, like, checking your ego, like, I think it's very easy to always pretend that you know everything, and not. It's really hard to admit you don't know something. But I think, you know being able to not be afraid of failing and actually admitting you don't know something, I think is a really important thing. So you keep growing. So I think that, to me, I think early on in my career, that's like, the biggest learning for me. And the grass is often green on the other side when you don't know. And then when you
Mhm,
start to explore, you start to really know what you want. So I think
mhm,
exploring, failing, learning new things, having good mentors. I think I wouldn't be here today if I didn't have some really good mentors, often to really tell me why I was being cocky or why I wasn't seeing certain things, or helping you see what you don't know.
mhm.
And yeah, so those are some things that come to mind.
I wonder, I have so many different questions there. Like one of them is, you had like pretty entrepreneurial spirit in the past, and then like, now you're working at a big tech. How do you leverage the creativity and like the experience of being an entrepreneur in a big tech job?
Yeah. Um, you know, I think different types of roles are good for different people. I think I
Mhm,
learned early on, um, I think entrepreneurship was very rewarding, but also it's always a trade-off, because when you're in a large organization, you have a lot more potential to make an impact, right?
mhm,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
with Adobe, for example, the kind of impact you can make is quite significant. But in a big company, there's a lot more friction to get stuff done,
mhm,
right? And so I think, a lot of it is around understanding like the context you have and what the context is good for and what it's not good for,
mhm,
and embracing what the strengths are, and also just kind of embracing its weaknesses, but in a way that you can
mhm,
challenge it in a pragmatic way.
mhm,
Because I'll give you a very simple example. At Adobe, when I had a startup, I could try anything I wanted, right? I could be
mhm,
really scrappy. We could send out email blast to everybody. You don't want to do that from Adobe and blast
mhm,
hundreds of millions of people,
mhm,
because Adobe Express, which is the product that I run, isn't the only product, right? And we
mhm,
have to think holistically about a user's experience. So like if you're an Adobe customer, you're using a lot of different products, right?
mhm,
What is your journey within that context?
mhm,
And so I think the great thing about entrepreneurship is you build the grit and you're super scrappy. And at the end of the day, process for process sake doesn't get you anywhere, right? So
mhm,
I think a can-do attitude, I think, particularly in like a startup team within a bigger company, is
mhm,
really important. At the end of the day, you just have to get stuff done.
mhm,
So I think that spirit is really important, that entrepreneurship can really help, in a large company.
mhm,
At the same time, I think you need to embrace the benefits of a large company, right? Because, I always joke with people, the worst thing you can do in a large company is to try and, deny everything else in a large company, saying, oh, everything's slow, and, just be a little island and do everything yourself. Because if you're an island, you'll never be faster than a startup, because you're in a big
mhm.
company by definition. So you have to sort of embrace the benefits of a big company, but then also challenge the status quo and do things differently. If that makes sense.
Totally.
Yeah.
I wonder, so like when it comes to um like creating strategies, since like you're the leader of your um area at Adobe, and like, I wonder like in terms of like creating a strategy for a particular product within the company, as well as like creating a strategy for your product going outside of the company, eventually, because you're dealing with clients outside of a big organization. um what's so like essentially, when I'm thinking about your job, there's like two part, right? Like one is like internally creating like a project and then selling it to the
Mm.
Adobe or like any big company internally, and then there's like the selling piece too, like the audience outside of the organization. Like, so I
You mean
guess like,
customers, like end users and end customers?
yeah, exactly. So how do you kind of like structure your time, and how do you identify what would be the most important job at your job? Obviously, we don't have to go into any detail if it's
Mm.
like confidential or like you don't feel comfortable talking about, like just on a high level. I mean, I can picture any big tech exec, like a VP at a big tech company, typically have to face probably the internally, like, you're selling to your organization itself, and
Yeah,
then on the other hand there's like managing the relationship like outside of the organization. I wonder, how do you kind of like shape your
yeah.
strategy on those two different things?
Grace, that was a big one. I think you asked me 10 questions in one. So we
Yeah,
should.
I'm sorry. I feel like it's just, like, come to my mind. I think the culture finally kick in. Then LinkedIn is LinkedIning, so I'm
Let
like
me start. Let me start. Then we can riff of each other. I think. I mean, let me share a few thoughts. I guess. I think first, I think when you're leading a product, and you're like, any tech product, you have to sort of rally a team behind something and really execute on it, right? At the same time, it's
Mhm,
for your end audience. At the end of the
mhm,
day, if you're not serving your users and putting them first, like, what are you doing, right? Why are we building product? We build
mhm,
product to make users' lives better, right? So, I think for me, um, there are three big things I think about. Like, I think about setting a really compelling vision and strategy
mhm,
that your team can rally around and believe in, right? Because at
mhm,
the end of the day, like, good product is a reflection of a great team that believes in what they do, um,
mhm,
and believes that they can really ultimately add value to this world, right? And so I think
mhm,
setting a really important vision um, that is compelling, both for your internal audience, to your point, but
mhm,
also for your external audience equally,
mhm,
is really important. And I don't actually think it's really any different, right? Because ultimately the
mhm,
user comes first, and if it's
mhm,
sufficiently compelling for the world, it will be compelling internally, and we have to sort of tell
mhm,
that story. And I think we always, like, as a leader, as a leadership, you always have to check yourself on, like, not drinking your own Kool-Aid, because you might think it sounds good internally and blah blah blah, and then to the world it's like, what do you mean? This sounds like everybody else. Like, what? So what? And I think that's really important, right? Because if it's like a me too, it's a so what, like, it's not compelling. We have to actually really help solve users' problems. So I think setting a really important vision and mission that people buy into, both externally and internally, is really important. So I think that's the first thing that comes to mind. I think
mhm,
the second thing that comes to mind is, and you know this, right? You talk to a lot of founders and investors and leaders. Um, a lot of people have great ideas. It's all about execution, right?
mhm,
You can have the best idea you can, but it's all about getting it to work. And so, I think for me, when you have a team, like a big team, and it's very complex, cross-functional, what are the really important processes and operating models, sort of things you have to have in place to make sure people can actually execute effectively, right?
mhm,
When I was a consultant for many years, and I mean, I think that was the best gift, to be a management consultant early on, because what I realized, in like, did it for like 5 years, what I realized was um, every company is dysfunctional. Like,
mhm,
on the outside, like, when you're advising companies, right, you advise them on the inside. When you look at any brand on the outside, it's so polished, right? Every brand is polished, right? But in the inside, it's just a group of people. Like, there's always things that work and things that don't work, and it's normal, right? And so the same people and team, no matter how talented they are, if they don't have the right way of working and operating and executing, you could get to very different outcomes, right? If you have the right processes
mhm,
in place and the right structures, the same team can do really well. And if you have the wrong ones in place, they can all fail, right? And so
mhm,
I always think about, it's not process for process sake. I think we're very lean and we just get things done. But
mhm,
what are the few things that make a huge impact on how we operate and how we execute? So I think that always comes to mind. It's like, every time I have a great idea, every time I have a goal, every time I have a mission, it's like, that's great, but how are we actually going to do it? And what are the
mhm,
few things we're going to do to sort of get it to be successful?
mhm,
And the last one probably would be, like, which I spend a lot of time on, um, is just culture. I think
mhm,
culture is really important to our team, to
mhm,
me, to our broader team. And if you set the right culture, like the right norms, both
mhm,
internally and also
mhm,
externally with your customers, um, everything else falls into place.
mhm,
The one thing internally for us is, um, I'm all about being direct. I don't like to go
mhm,
around in circles. If something works, it's great, say it. If it doesn't work, say it. Doesn't matter about hierarchy. If you're the most junior person in the team, if you're an intern,
mhm,
you have an obligation to dissent if something doesn't make sense. Like, Ian, this
mhm,
doesn't make sense. Please explain to me. I think that's really, really important. And to do that, you need to have trust, right? You need to trust each
mhm,
other and know that people mean well. But I think that's something that I spend a lot of time on. And I think the more an organization can do that, the more you can execute. So anyway, I think for me, that's where I spend my time, across
mhm.
these three areas. Does that answer your question? Does that help?
Totally. I have like a piggyback question on like I guess like setting up the team kind of thing. So I wonder since your team is focusing on the product, um I guess one question is like what goes into a great product? What is a good product? What is a great product? And how do you define success at your role? I know I feel like I make it sounds like a job interview, but I'm like literally like what is like yeah, like I guess like I just wanted to understand from like a leader's perspective, like how do you kind of like set KPI for yourself and um how do you kind of like navigate a team of people to do it as like a person running a smaller company. Like I mean it's easier to manage, let's call it like a 4 people or something, but like when you're running a team of like a lot bigger, like hundreds of people or something, like how
Mm.
do you quickly identify what is the core thing that you need to do at that point?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I think again, I think you could take this a few different directions. I mean, let's
Mhm,
start with your point around a great product.
mhm,
Um, I think it's always important to be striving for greatness and
mhm,
accept that you still have a long way to go.
mhm,
And I think, for us, it's about that constant improvement and constant iteration. For those that are not familiar with Adobe Express, our mission is around empowering everyone to create great content in a very simple to use app. And as you know, Adobe is known for some incredible products, right? A
mhm,
lot of great technologies, whether it's Photoshop or Illustrator or Premiere Pro. Not everyone knows how to use these products. They're not really designed for necessarily everybody to use.
mhm,
So Adobe Express is really about bringing all of that together and to make it super easy to use and accessible and
mhm,
making sure that everyone feels empowered, right? Particularly for their work, for their
mhm,
business, for their work, because it's very work and business oriented,
mhm,
and for school, right? Because we have a lot of kids at schools, using Adobe Express.
mhm,
And so when it comes to great from our perspective, I think ultimately it is about really solving people's needs in ways that they haven't been able to solve these needs before.
mhm,
And if we're not mission critical to them, to our users, it's just a nice to have,
mhm,
And I think what we're striving for is really to be mission critical so that, for you, Grace, one day you'll be
mhm,
like, I can't run, my
mhm,
whatever content without using Express because I love it for
mhm,
this. And
mhm,
I think 7 months ago, and this is an on constant journey. We built this product from the ground up,
mhm,
and only launched our mobile app a few months ago, and the desktop
mhm,
app we launched last year. Before that, we actually had a set of smaller apps that
mhm,
was part of the portfolio, but they were really legacy apps, and so we
mhm,
rebuilt Adobe Express from the ground up recently. But even with the legacy apps, as we transitioned users from the existing apps to the new app, um, some of the features that we actually tweaked um, gave a few thousand users a really tough time. They were like, "This is my livelihood. Like,
mhm,
this just didn't work quite right for me." And
mhm,
that was obviously this is an ongoing learning moment for us. But part of it being people's livelihood is what you want, right? You want people to love it, rely on it, champion it, and
mhm,
actually ultimately be something that they need.
mhm,
Know? And I think that's what we're striving for, to be something that they need. And I think the biggest challenge, back to great product today, which I see it as the biggest opportunity, is AI. And we haven't talked about AI yet, but we should at some point.
mhm,
Um, AI is fundamentally going to change how people create content. It's super exciting, right? And I think great products need to see ahead and think about
mhm,
okay, people have the habitual needs to do things a certain way, but actually, the right solution is to do it this way, and it's actually 10 times better. And helping people to actually transition in a way that is so much better is something that we're very focused on because we're in that tipping point. I think a lot of things is gonna change, and for Express is really about reimagining,
mhm,
new ways to do things. And so, again, being very practical about solving people's real needs, but also thinking ahead, I think is something that we're really striving for. And still, to me, I think it's day 1
mhm,
for us, and there's still a lot to do. And so, so I think you asked about like how to manage a team to do that as well, but I don't know if that helps on at least how I see great products.
totally. I wonder, so like, how do you create? So like, a startup like that's, I don't know, call it like 3 people or something, like it's easier to launch a product and then test and rapidly go back to building like a random new feature and then go back to test and then build new feature. It's easier for them to do the launch to the world and then see if like product hunt people give them some idea or something. But versus like a big company like, Adobe or like any big company cannot just launch and then test the result immediately just like by launching like a really minimum viable product, because there's a lot of expectations from, the brand and like just like people's uh there's just like a way bigger distribution versus any kind
Yeah.
of startups. I guess like since like you mentioned like the product was like built from the ground up like last year, and it's been like absolutely like fast growing, and I wonder when you're building a product in a bigger organization, I guess like what would you do to like kind of like gathering customer feedback and then build
Mm.
on top of it? And I guess like how does it work to build a product at a very established company, like build a new product at a very established company?
Grace, you're on a roll. You're asking me 10 deep questions in every
Oh
question.
God, I'm
There's so
sorry.
much to
I my
explore.
brain is just all over the place. I mean,
No, no, no,
obviously
no, no.
we
This is
do
good.
not talk
Wait,
about
let,
we
let
do
me
not, yeah,
let me
yeah.
try to this. It's every time we chat, we just we can talk about everything. So let's let me start with a few, let me try to answer a few of what you just said, and then we
Mhm,
can tell me if this helps. So I think you started with yeah, so you started with like sort of when you're a startup, you can
mhm,
ship really quickly, right? And
mhm,
so actually something to be aware of, like we ship features every day.
mhm,
We can ship features multiple times a day. So and we're doing like tons of experimentation all the time. And so if you're a new user, you might see one experience, and another new user must see a different experience. So actually, I think just because you're in a big company, it doesn't mean you can't iterate and ship things really quickly. I mean, we
mhm,
do that every day. And so we
mhm,
have things landing all the time. And so that's one point. Having said that, um, there are certain things, particularly for Adobe, that we believe
mhm,
in, and it's uncompromising. We do not compromise on some of these things, to your point.
mhm,
And that those are things that we take very seriously. So, for example, we're in a lot of schools, right?
mhm,
And we have a lot of users that are under 18. You
mhm,
know, my kids are obsessed with Express when it comes to generative AI. They're playing with it
mhm,
all the time. They're creating all these like
mhm,
little characters and all sorts of stuff. And in that example, safety and quality of their experience is super important, right? And so we're very, very strict about under 18, users, and in terms of the experience we present and what we are able to test quickly, what we aren't able to test, and those are things that are just we just don't compromise on, right?
mhm,
Another good example is how we approach generative AI, right? Our models are proprietary. We train them on only content that we have rights to, so they're commercially safe. And so there are some things, how we deal with terms and conditions, how we deal with like, in terms of, um, what we are able to send emails, like who we're able to contact, who we shouldn't contact, all those kinds of things, right? There's a bunch of things where it's just uncompromising. So I think that's the balance. There are some things that will iterate a lot. I mean, there are hypotheses all the time that the team has, like, oh, would users love this? Would they love that? And we're doing A/B tests all the time. Right now there's a dozen right now that we have today at the moment. So I think that's the first thing. You also asked about building product organizationally. Is this more around like the size, like how you coordinate, you know, employees at a bigger scale? I'm just curious, like which sort of direction were you thinking?
Please tell me what I don't know, because I don't know how to build a product or a team at a big organization in
Yeah,
general. I feel like I probably shouldn't admit it on my own podcast, but yeah, I feel like this is something that I'm like always so fascinated about. Like, how do you kind of like gather maybe the existing team member at a bigger company to
yeah,
come work on something? And
yeah.
obviously, I know there's a lot of like cross functional pieces. And yeah, like since like you're the leader of this ship, how do you kind of like internal recruit or versus like do you need to recruit people outside? Like how does a team is
Yeah,
built
yeah,
around a product at a company?
makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really tough problem, like how to be efficient. I'm constantly learning like the best way to do it, because I think this is like one of those things that will you'll never get perfect at it, and you'll always want to
Mhm,
strive to be better. I think you're absolutely right. When you only have 3 or 4 people to build a product, it's so easy, right? You're sitting together, you're just gonna getting it done. It's like end to end. It's like really easy to have a really smooth end to end experience, right? Because
mhm,
you just have you have a very finite scope. The bigger the product and the more complex the product, it's hard because you have like, so let me explain, like there are two extreme ends, right? You have
mhm,
one end of the spectrum, and we talk about this all the time internally. You have one end of the spectrum where you have like, oh, we need to optimize for really smooth end-to-end experiences that like connect. So you're not shipping your organization, right? People will say like, don't
mhm,
ship your organization, right? Um, but then like with a product like Express, you have like hundreds of entry points and like tons of different ways you can do something. So
mhm,
imagine like, forget about hundreds, like imagine like even dozens, organizing your team around each specific workflow. Imagine if you
mhm,
did that, right? So that you can move quickly. The good news with that is you can move quickly with that workflow, but you're duplicating 80% of the stuff because every workflow has shared pieces, right? Like, well,
mhm,
every workflow needs this and every workflow needs that. And you get into like crazy duplication, which is not efficient, right? On
mhm,
the other end of the spectrum, you can say, no, nothing is organized by really seamless workflows. It's just all organized about on like shared components, right? So
mhm,
everyone builds a component and then nothing hangs together, right? It's like
mhm,
all like bits and pieces and it's all like sort of efficient because everyone's done their sort of stage, but none of the stages come together. And so the art of like for us as a big team is to figure out the happy medium where you're matrixed in some areas, but in other areas you have really like agile end-to-end virtual teams that can get things done really quickly,
mhm,
and trying to find that happy medium. And we're very flexible on like um, adjusting as we go. Like in one part of our product lifecycle or where we are as a product, we might have this structure, but maybe 6 months later we need to adjust, and we're very agile in adjusting
mhm,
how we work.
mhm.
um, and so I think that's a big part of the. Does that make sense, Grace? Like, it's kind of like those are the two extreme ends of the spectrum. And then in a larger organization, even you could take any big company, right? Big tech company. One leader of a product never owns the whole product outright, and they probably shouldn't, right? So,
Mhm,
for example, we have search capabilities, right?
mhm,
The search team is led by a separate leader because he is thinking about best in class search across all our properties. And
mhm,
some of the search capabilities within Express surfaces all the other assets you have that you've created in Photoshop and everything else. So
mhm,
by design, you want that team to be thinking across the whole company, right? Across the apps. And you get the best outcomes for your users. So, sharing wins with
mhm,
the rest of the company is really important, right? Because I'm not
mhm,
successful if um, the whole company is behind what I do. And a lot of the success in the product is not due to just my team. A lot
mhm,
of teams have contributed to the success of my product or any other product at Adobe. And so within the team, you've got sort of different models to organize different teams. But then in any team, in a large organization, you have a lot of other shared teams, marketing or
mhm,
brand
mhm.
or platform teams, right? There's all these
Mhm.
different teams, and so um, it's that's the other piece to sort of consider as well.
Totally. I want to quickly say hi to the audience. Hi, Beth. So I wonder, when it comes to, okay, so I will ask one more question around this, like leading a product at a big organization realm, and then we have like so many other amazing areas to talk about like AI and creators, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
Um, so one thing about um identifying, like I guess like when you're setting up goals, let's call it like, oh, from as a founder, like in each time that like the founder raised money from like seed to A or whatever,
Mhm.
like they have a revenue goal, they have like a certain like by Series A, you're supposed to have like $1 million as revenue or whatever. Like, so people have like specific goals for startups, but for big companies, um, what even would be the relevant goal? Since like, you're leading the product run, and then there's like, the revenue people, there's the marketing people, and I wonder how do you like, kind of like measure the success of like a year or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think first for starters, every company of all sizes, every product of all sizes have goals. I don't think it's any
Mhm,
different, right? It's
mhm,
also like, sometimes you hear people say, um, oh, I'm sick of like working in a large organization where I can't control my own destiny. I want to go start my own thing. And then they quickly realize, well, they have investors and they still have
yeah.
investors to ask to. It's the same thing, right?
Mhm,
You're accountable for your own product or business. And to be successful, you need to set bold goals and you need to have
mhm,
very clear KPIs. Um, and when I think about goals, they need to be really ambitious and bold, but also realistic, right? Because if they're not realistic, you end up butter spreading and failing. You can't nail anything, right? So
mhm,
I think, but goals are important too. So in a large organization, it's no different. Like, we
mhm,
have revenue goals, we have um, mal growth goals, we have engagement goals. Depending on where you are in your product life cycle, like what kind of business you have, you might prioritize different goals. And most goal, like with any organization, you can never be a purist about it, right? Because there's
mhm,
always going to be conflicting goals and
mhm,
conflicting challenges, and it's on the leadership to make sure that we balance the right priorities and set the right tone and make sure that we don't confuse the team. But for Express, it's the same. Ultimately, we're a business. What I care about the most from the product standpoint is user love and user engagement. Because for products, at the end of the day, I think there are two things, right? If you're a commercial product, um, you ultimately have a foundational belief that you have a business model that can be sustainable. Because otherwise, why would you have a commercial business? You have to believe that there's a model that you're ultimately building that is sustainable and can become a viable business.
mhm,
But then, if that's the case, for me as a product leader, the most important thing is to drive user love and user engagement. If
mhm,
ultimately we don't have users that love the product and want to keep coming back and want to tell their friends and feel like they're successful, nothing else really matters, right?
mhm,
Now, if you start with a product assertion that fundamentally has no business model, then
mhm,
I would challenge why you would sort of go there. But if you do believe there's a fundamental business model, then it's around being very clear about what stage your business or product is in and what are the most important metrics to take you to that next level, right?
mhm,
But absolutely, just like startups have investors, we're accountable to our broader leadership and ultimately the board, right? When you're a public company,
mhm,
you're accountable to the board. So it's the same thing. I mean, we have very clear goals and KPIs, and we have to hold myself accountable, hold my peers accountable, hold my team accountable. So it's no different. I wish it was easier, but it isn't, compared to some.
mhm. Um, I totally understand. I feel like it's just such a I feel like any product leader or any leader at a tech company in general, like there's a lot more um things to consider because I feel like eventually if you're a startup founder, uh you only have to answer one investor, but like you as a big tech leader, you supposed to, I guess, like also there's like I didn't really imagine about there's like the conflicts between different teams. Maybe people have like different priorities in general, and then there must be a lot of like more intricate thoughts behind every decision you make. I feel like it's probably like a lot harder to a degree, but it's also hard as a founder. But I mean, I guess there are just like different problems to
Yeah. I mean, you talk
solve.
about goals. I think, again, I, I'm- I think with most people, they don't like to be micromanaged, right? Micromanaging is not a good thing to have.
Mhm,
And as a manager, you learn very quickly. As a leader, you learn very quickly how to empower your team, how to make sure people are successful, right? And the way we have effective teams that are empowered to make their own decisions. The way that they become effective is there's like very clear strategic alignment. Like everyone knows what the
Mhm.
strategy is and are clear on the strategy. Because if people have different interpretations of the
Mhm.
strategy, right, then you'll have chaos. So
Mhm.
strategic clarity is important. But the other thing that's really important, which you touched on, is setting the right goals and metrics.
Mhm.
Because you got to be really careful about that. If you set the wrong metric, everyone is like, we should all be goal oriented, but if you set the wrong metric, you can lead to really adverse and unintended outcomes, right?
Mhm.
Right. Could be whatever it is, right? If you're a streaming platform, it might be hours watched or whatever it might be. But um, if you set the wrong metric, you might, and on the product side, we do a lot of product experimentation and PLG and so forth. But if you set the wrong metric, inadvertently you have all these side effects,
Mhm.
that you didn't anticipate. And so being really thoughtful about what metric you want to set, what goal you want to set, and actually think ahead. Like if you're setting a goal, if I was this person, would she or would he, how would they optimize against that metric, and would the outcomes be what you anticipated for the users,
Mhm.
for the business, for whatever? And when you have different leaders with and peers with very conflicting metrics, that's even worse, right? Because not only one metric that might get you the wrong outcome, but you might just fundamentally set up people to fail, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that's like super, super important. And we're always like, as a leadership, thinking about like, okay, is this driving the right behaviors? Do we have too many goals? Because you have too many goals, like nothing, it's like, it's all kind of, on a spread and nothing matters, and prioritization is really important as well.
Mm. Okay, so I want to jump into the next like big sector, which is AI. So everything is AI-fied to a degree. So like AI is in everything. Like a table is AI. Like this microphone is AI.
Are you
Everything's
overwhelmed
AI.
by AI? I'm just curious, like, how do you think about AI? Like, as you're not like an AI expert, but you talk to a lot of people in that space. Like, how do you feel? Like, is it something that's exciting, overwhelming? Like, what's your take?
I think it's like between exciting and overwhelming at the same time. Like I think I completely I'm bullish on the technology itself. I feel like, we can see concrete result on like, no matter if it's like ChatGPT or Anthropic's like chat functions or to like leveraging AI to do all different kind of things. For example, in Adobe Express, when I was using it, and there were like, you can describe like what kind of vibe you want on a picture or something.
Mhm.
I truly feel like those things are very important. Um, but yeah, like there's also a lot of things that like, it's called AI, but it's not really like, I mean, I don't really know which part of it is AI, but
Yeah,
yeah, I like that, you know, my water bottle says it's, having AI technology into it, but it's like a water bottle, like it I don't know, it has lights, but like I don't technically know which part of it is AI, but like I feel like it's maybe overkill on some products.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I think a few things. I think first of all, at least as a product person, if you lead with like, oh, I have this technology, I want to make this technology, I want to just jam this down people's throats, you're
Mhm.
most likely going to fail, right? Because I think um, any technology for technology's sake is not really what building great products is about, right? I think
Mhm.
building great products is about identifying a real need, like a user problem, and then finding the best way to solve that problem, right? So I think, in other words, in the topic of AI for AI's sake, like I'm just going to jam AI down your throat, right?
Mhm.
Like everything I'm going to jam AI, it's not the right way to sort of help our users, right? Because to be honest, for everyday people and users, they don't care if it's AI or not. They just want it to be better,
Mhm.
and for us, building products, it's about knowing what technologies are great and when to serve those technologies to our end users, right?
Mhm.
And to be honest, whether we call it AI or not, it's kind of
Mhm.
irrelevant, right?
Mhm.
With Adobe, we've been in this AI game for decades and decades, for ages. I mean, like if you think about Photoshop, I mean, so much of Photoshop has been driven by AI for years and years and years. Like, the infamous magic wand or whatever. Like,
Mhm.
there's so many things, right? That
Mhm.
that has been there. So, AI is not a new concept. I think recently it's been so big. due to the massive step change developments in generative AI, right? And actually, generative AI has been something that's been pretty exciting in the labs and in the research papers for quite some time, for quite a few years. And it's just that it's hit a real tipping point in the last year or two. And I think the important thing about AI now, though, is that it is fundamentally going to change, I think, how we do things. I think that's the difference, right? I don't know. I'm sure you play with a bunch of recent stuff, out there. But even if I think about the creative world, the traditional way to create content has been like, you've got all these things, you've got all these layers, and you play with all these layers, and you move things around, and it's always based on a mouse, and you kind of move it around. But in the future, it's multimodal, and it's like not necessarily the concept of these traditional layers. You might just say, hey, give me this. And then you'd say, okay, I like it, but I just want to tweak that. And all these other kind of habits that people think is like gospel, like, oh, when you create something, you have to go through these steps. They're going to change. They're going to be different, and I think that's the power of where we are today, which is like, for us, it's not about jamming AI down people's throats, but it is a huge opportunity for us to rethink and reimagine how solutions will be built for our users. And that's what we're really excited about. So with Express from the ground up has been built with AI in mind. We sort of talk about it as an AI first app. We think about it, and right now we're only scratching the surface. There's a lot that we're working on. How we present that to users, it might not be AI this and AI that, though, Grace. But I think we're very excited about the opportunities ahead and what that could do. And so it's a balance, right? And I think for everyday users, they're actually intimidated by how to get up to speed with AI. So I think for us, we want to make sure it's accessible.
I have so many questions on what should be like, I guess, like, how do you kind of leverage AI as a technology for like to implement into your products, right? So for me, just like thinking as a founder, so like for how my company use AI, or like how I think about AI is like, I would think about, okay, so here is I would like sit down and do a lot of research, or like chat with friends who are even more technical than me. And like, I mean, I'm not technical, but like, so basically people who are also familiar with a lot of like different tools, and like basically streamline the process, as like maybe write a Google Doc of like, okay, here's like 65 things in our process, and then there's like 5 things that could be significantly, like, I will identify which task is like the most like time consuming, low lift, or like very high output kind of task, and then think if there's any AI tool that could be like replacing me or our team member or something, like to do XYZ. And then like that's like how I implement AI into my workflow. But the product itself is like not necessarily AI. So I wonder, for you to think about like a technical product, how do you think about leveraging AI to either improve your workflow as a leader slash a team manager versus like AI to put into a technical product?
Yeah. Are you referring to, are you distinguishing between like how we are using AI in building our own products versus how we're leveraging AI to help us work internally?
Yeah, yeah,
Is that what you're
yeah,
saying?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, first of all, yeah, like there's different types of AI, right? To your point. So,
Mhm,
the most recent, as we think about LLMs and all those kinds of things, and generative AI, that's one category, but there's
mhm,
lots of different types of categories. And I think, they're all good for different things. And I think we should mix and match. When it comes to your own process, I think, so first of all, let me start with this analogy, because I always find it fascinating. Um, at least, I'm from Sydney, and growing up, I was always frustrated by whenever there's like a really busy road, like there's two
mhm,
lanes and you're always in traffic, and they start to build another lane, and you're like, oh my
mhm,
God, this is going to change my life, because now there's a third lane and there
mhm,
won't be any traffic. And it works for like 2 months, and then there's traffic again.
Mhm.
you know, because like you change the game on something, but then like people realize, oh, now like I used to catch the bus and now the traffic is easy, so I'm going to drive now. And
Mhm.
then it's like, just as bad, And
Mhm.
when I think about like AI, there's a lot of talk of like, oh, like we don't need this anymore, we don't need that anymore. Like, oh, we can generate anything now, so why would you create it yourself or blah blah blah.
Mhm.
And the fundamental human needs are still the same. Like for example, if you're a creator, you need to have a point of view and you need to stand out. So
Mhm.
if you have everybody all using an LLM to write for them, you know,
Mhm.
they probably all sound the same, and then
Mhm.
there'll be new
Mhm.
technologies to build on
Mhm.
top of that to make you then stand out again. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so I think like when I think about AI in our own workflows, I think about it in different ways, right? There's certain things where AI is going to help you be more efficient. To your point, like they're mundane things that you don't want to do, and it's going to make you more efficient. In software engineering, there's a lot of engineering teams are leveraging AI tools now to speed up the way they develop code, right? And there's a ton of research on even working on, different aspects of products where it's actually going to be, you're generating an app in real time to serve a user's need, right? So this is
Mhm.
a huge thing. So this is really on like how to be more efficient.
Mhm.
And at Adobe, we're spending a lot of time on that. How do engineering teams be more efficient, with AI?
Mhm.
Um, Another space is not about efficiency, but it's more about actually helping you be better. And so AI is really good for ideation, right? Like today, you're
Mhm.
always like ideating, right? Like even
Mhm.
for a creative professional, right? Think about like the best designers out there. They're always ideating, but they're
Mhm.
ideating previously by, I don't know, going for a walk, going to the gallery, going to do
Mhm.
different things,
Mhm.
And now there are ways to rapidly ideate and get into a place where maybe they otherwise wouldn't be able to get to quickly,
Mhm.
or spark new ideas, right?
Mhm.
So ideation is a big part of our workflows. We're now internally ideating designs, ideating concepts. Our marketing teams are doing a lot of ideation with AI right now on like new concept, new ways to do things. So, and the other one is around not so much saving you time or doing things better, but it's actually about um, doing things that you couldn't otherwise do at scale. And so a lot of what we've done internally is like, before you only had the capacity to do X amount, now you can 10X it, and do a lot more, including like you're a creator. Like how hard is it to create content for like 10 different channels? It's hard, right? Like you probably have a
Mhm.
few target channels that you focus on, but to
Mhm.
try to do tailored content for each one is really hard.
Mhm.
Localization is a big problem for businesses. Like they could probably target their language and their content and communications to sort of English nations or certain countries, but then how do they speak, appropriately to 100 different languages? And AI can now help you do that. Like you can actually do it at scale, And so I think about it in these different ways,
Mhm.
and for different jobs, it helps you in different ways. Um, does that does that make sense to you?
Totally. I like what you said about like, I feel like there is um a lot of things could be done at scale versus in the past people have to like recreate everything, and then it's just like basically efficiency is like basically AI like improve the efficiency as well as like just basically help you automate a lot of stuff. And I wonder like but also like in terms of using AI, I mean I was taking notes, so I'm like looking at my notes. My notes is like all over the place. So
You need an
uh
AI to write your notes.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I
You need
do
an
have an AI to write my notes, but I feel like it's better to also take notes to actively listen to the conversation.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. Like, if LLM is like writing everyone's content, everyone sounds the same, but it's better for like ideation related things. I wonder, since like Adobe works with a lot of creators, actually, like whenever I go on Instagram, I can always see like my favorite creators to do something with Adobe. And I wanted to learn more about like, um, when it comes to working with creators, um, the creators that I watch, they are typically like the um in like a TikTok format. So like the things that I've seen are like they made a short video about Adobe or something like that. And I wonder, um, how do you guys typically work with creators with from like Adobe Express perspective, and what type of creators are you typically looking for? Because I would use like I think I saw it on Girl Boss Town, who is I think she's just like making, oh my god, how do I even define her video? It's like maybe celebrity gossip. But or like just like I mean, I saw a lot of like influencers, but like I mean the she's
Yeah.
on top of my mind because I just like I mean I love her content. Yeah, I mean obviously it gives out I don't like, my taste on like social media. But anyway, so I would love to hear you guys' perspective on like how do you kind of like engage with the right creator in the ecosystem, and how do Adobe pick like which creator to work with, and what kind of like KPI do you try to get out of like working with creators?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of there's a broader Adobe angle, and then there's the Adobe you talked about my product Adobe Express angle. But I think first of all, Adobe, um, it's bread and butter to work with creators
Mhm,
for Adobe, right? We're the creativity
mhm,
company. We champion the value of creativity. We've done it for decades, and
mhm,
we have funds to support creatives and creators, and it's a big part of our mission, right? To you know um, uh, empower creators to be successful and to make a living and all that kind of stuff. Um, I think a few other things. I mean, lately, and you know this, you're being part of this world. The really exciting thing is, the definition of a creator has really
mhm,
broadened, right? Like everyone is
mhm.
a creator. Like I had one of my arborists. He's got a very active social following. And
Wait,
it's
who is that? What is your
they
address?
cut, they trim trees and no,
Oh
but if you think
wow.
about it, like every small business is a creator. I mean, how many creators emerged during um, uh, even COVID,
Mhm,
amazing bakers and whatever it
mhm,
might be that can showcase their craft, right?
mhm,
But in a way that's really authentic. And so the definition of a creator is much broader than maybe the professional creative, so to speak. And for Adobe Express, our mission is to really empower everyone to sort of create content and be creative.
mhm,
And most importantly, it's really about everyone has a unique point of view, right? And
mhm,
to empower them to have their point of view and to
mhm,
express it. And so I think for us, a big part of it is to have a broader definition of creators and to support people of
mhm,
different types of sort of avenues and different ways that they communicate. So I think that's an important part of how we think about the creator community. And we have like advisory boards and different creators also vary by their generation, right? You've got the
mhm,
Gen Zs and you've got the
mhm,
different generations. Every generation is different. And it's not just for them to help us build a community and for us to foster and support them and their art and craft, but it's also very importantly to have them provide us feedback on what's working, what's not working in terms of the product that we build
mhm,
and what they need, right? And so a big part of these creators is to give us feedback, right? So
mhm,
a lot of them are part of our sort of advisory board, if you will, and um, diversity in point of views is really important, right? Because if you have an
mhm,
echo chamber of like one type of creator,
mhm,
um, or the traditional creative, you'll get a very siloed and specific piece of feedback, which might not be helpful. So I think that's how I think about it. But Adobe as a whole, um, that's like a bread and butter, right? That's what we
mhm,
champion.
mhm. So, what would you focus on, like, as for example, Adobe Express targeted creator? So you mentioned like it's a diverse group of people. I guess like, do you have to do like a maybe like put together like a customer profile kind of thing, like basically like the user experience?
Grace, are you interested? Should we
Oh
have a should we should
God,
we have a separate offline thread on
yeah, for
the
sure,
project?
yeah, 100%. Okay,
100%.
so
I,
I
I won't do a live interview with you while we broadcast it. We can talk offline about this.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so I wanted to learn more about like, okay, so in terms of um I guess like we chat about building team and everything. Like as a leader, like what's your content diet look like to kind of keep yourself educated within the industry, as well as like how do you kind of like get leadership or like product ideas every day? Like I guess like what type of like content would you consume? It's not going to be the news, or it's not going to be like a deep dive industry report and stuff.
Oh, okay. As in like how to sort of stay abreast and
Yeah.
think about what's yeah. I think I'm always really like I always check myself and I'm concerned about always being in an echo chamber. Like for example, the
Mhm.
Bay Area is a bit of a bubble as well.
Yeah.
And so I think for me it's about really exposing myself to different perspectives in different sort of contexts. I think that's really,
Mhm.
really important, right? So, um, for example, like all of us in the product team, we every week we have real live conversations with users, leaders like me included. I'll have one-on-one conversations with users, and not through my team. I think it's really important I have these one-on-one conversations because when it gets synthesized, it's completely different. And even the way a user tells you information, it's so important to have that direct dialogue with the users. And a lot of these users often are not the users that love our product. They're users that have no idea about
Mhm.
what Express is about, right?
Mhm.
So like that's one example, right? That's one kind of perspective. And obviously, like being really involved with like the broader dialogues around the new technologies and the different sort of communities, that's obviously super important. Podcasts, we all have our favorite
Mhm.
podcasts and the people we follow and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
um, but I think it's really about making sure we're not listening to one type of source. You know, the investment community, the Bay Area has one
Mhm.
type of source, right? And I think it's really important. As a product like Adobe as a company and Express, where it's an international product, you get very different perspectives from, for example, people in Japan versus people in the UK versus people in Asia, right? For example, and so geodiversity perspectives, um, you know, um, the types of users you talk to, the type of experts you talk to, and then also discussion, like a lot of open discussion and debate with people that, particularly people that challenge you. Like
Mhm.
my wife is a great one. She's not in the industry. So half the time she's just like, I don't care about this stuff. Like, yeah, like you guys care about this, but as a general everyday user, like you just, and you got to check yourself. So I think, like we all have our favorite things we read, but I think for me, it's about that diversity because it sparks new ideas, and it keeps you grounded. And at the end of
Mhm.
the day, if you're a product that wants to serve a lot of
Mhm.
people, you got to be grounded, right? In like the
Mhm.
everyday person.
Mhm. Totally. Okay, so we're at the last part of the interview. I have a quick 1 minute fire round for you.
Oh, okay.
What's your favorite book?
My favorite book. Oh my God. I don't think I have a favorite book. I used to have. There was one. I need to send you the link. There was a really famous. He was a Saatchi and Saatchi um, creative director, and he wrote a book. I need to find you that name. But that was a great one. It was so amusing, but I found it so fascinating. I'm not going to list you one of my favorite tech books because there's just so many, and it just depends, right?
Totally. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Ooh, I don't know. I want to meet Warren Buffett. I think it'll be
Oh,
great.
same, same. Please invite me to to this
He
dinner.
sounds like exactly my point around like not in our echo chamber, and someone who I respect, but would just think about things differently. So
Yeah, I feel like he's such an interesting person. I also wanted to learn more about like his. I mean, I just think he have the most interesting diet as like he eat Burger
yeah,
King.
why does he eat burgers 4 days a week or whatever?
Yeah, and then he's like very long living, and then I feel like it's a really good. Um, I mean, yeah, like I'm just so jealous of like the diet.
The
I,
fact
I
that he
couldn't pull it
just
off.
reads newspapers, right? We all know this.
Yeah,
It's a common fact. But you get back to the basics. Maybe there's only certain things that really matter. We get so entrenched in all our efficiency techniques and hacks on how to get more information, and the guy just reads the newspaper. So sometimes you go back to basics.
for sure. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
That's a really good question. I'd say one of the partners I worked with when I was a management consultant, and the biggest lesson I learned from him, and he would drill that into me, is if you can't communicate something clearly, don't blame your communication skills. It's because you're not thinking clearly. And I think
Mm,
that's always stuck with me. And I always have since really thought really clearly about what it is I want to say. Because if I can't say it clearly, I'm probably not thinking about something clearly.
that's deep, and it is also really true. Where can we find you outside of work?
With my kids, I have an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. They definitely keep me busy. They keep me grounded. So I'm most likely hang out with them, um, in the park and doing silly stuff.
Amazing. Wow, Ian, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's such a fun conversation.
Thanks, Grace. Likewise. We can talk offline about some of those other things.
Okay, sounds good. Let me just quickly end stream.